Hey there, and welcome to Good Morning L&D. I'm Moritz, and I'm super excited to be kicking off the very first episode of our Good Morning L&D Unleashed special today. Yes, I was at Unleashed in Paris, one of maybe the most influential HR conferences in the world, and got the chance to meet some of the most interesting minds in talent and development right there, live and in person. So what did we talk about? Well, we're all placing this big bet on AI, right? But the real question is, how do we actually win it? Dr. Sandra Loughlin, the Chief Learning Scientist at EPAM Systems, is the first guest I asked this question to. Her answer was radically clear. We need to stop saying learning when what the business actually needs is measurable outputs. In this episode, we're digging into how does EPAM use skills to ensure business agility? How do they measure that gap between what's needed and the reality? And why should the business, not L&D, be the one responsible for learning? A lot of the episodes in this special are in English. And you guessed it, this is one of them. I really hope you enjoy listening. And hey, if you like what you hear, feel free to subscribe for more.
So I want to start where you come from, and this doesn't mean, your universal background and the company you work for, but where you have been on Friday, to be more accurate.
Okay, sure.
And it has been, I think, a Chief Learning Officer Forum at Harvard University.
Yes.
Which I think says a lot about you in a way. How did you end up there, and what were you talking about? And maybe you can, fill us into your world.
Yes. Okay. Well, it was the first time that I'd actually been back to Harvard since I'd graduated in, many years ago. And I went to speak to a group of chief learning officers from incredibly important big companies about what it means to actually support learning in organizations. And there were a few things that we were talking about, but one of the biggest ones was the fact that most learning organizations in corporations are not actually focused on learning, they're focused on training. And those are very different things. And so the talk was, the first part of it, which is what I posted about on LinkedIn, was about discriminating our language better. Because right now in L&D, we use the word learning to mean three completely different things. So the first one is training. The stuff that we do to people to get them to master new information. Importantly, it's not just the training that actually we should be focused on, it's also informal learning, so experiences and mentorship and reflection and all kinds of other things. But all of that I think of as the inputs to people. So that's number one. The second way that we think about learning or talk about learning in L&D is what happens inside the person when they are making sense of all of these inputs. So this would be analogical reasoning and reflection and construction and practice and all of these things that happen inside of people that are the process where, ultimately learning ideally occurs. That's number two. Number three is the outputs of learning. So this would be stuff like behaviors and ways of working and mindset and skills and knowledge. And when we were discussing together with the CLOs, I kept saying, we need to clean up our language, because so often when we talk to each other, we're all saying learning, but we actually mean different things. You might mean inputs, I might mean process, the business absolutely means outputs. And so what we have to do as a field is become clear on these three elements of learning and talk about them differently so that we can actually improve all three of them.
I think it's spot on, super interesting. And the experience that I have or what I see in the market is that some L&Ds, I think also more progressive ones, they, even move beyond learning, and they no longer talk about learning because learning for them has been burned in a way that they do not get the attention, their topics, I guess, really deserve in a time like this. Is that also a development? Now that we're in the semantics, I thought I'd just bring this in.
So the business still talks about learning, and they mean outputs.
Yeah.
Right. But
growth, right?
They just mean we need people to work in new ways. We need them to do their jobs differently.
Yeah.
And that's all they really care about. How people get there, like, frankly, no one cares about. And I think that, L&D organizations, even the most progressive ones, still have to talk about learning because it is the process by which we help people close the gap between what the business needs them to know and be able to do and what they are actually able to know and be able to do. And so I'm not opposed to the idea of talking about learning. I just think that we need to be more precise about it and talk to the business about outcomes and behaviors and ways of working, not training.
Yeah. And this all trickles down also to how we measure, right?
Absolutely.
Learning and
Yes.
the impact of learning. That was the second thought that
Yes.
you inspired, right? If I look on most of the companies in Germany, they are still measuring the impact of learning by the time people spend in their LMS or like XP or whatever, right? And this is also what they can then report in their sustainability reports.
Yeah. That's not good. let me just say this now. So this is something that I think L&D actually is generally very poor at, because people were not taught how to do this. When you think about how to measure learning, the process, and, well, all three of them really, it's about measuring delta or change in outputs. So if we want to measure the impact of a training program, what we have to do is assess at the very beginning what every individual already knows and is able to do with whatever we're going to try to teach them. So we need to get a baseline. Then we have to build the learning experience for them. And then we have to measure again that exact same stuff to see if Sandra actually does better than she did before this. Like this is what, as a field, we generally are not been taught how to do well, because it's not about how much time I spent. Who cares? It isn't about how much I clicked on. Who cares? It's about what is my skill and behavior and way of working before and after. This is one of the most important things that I think the L&D field needs to get good at in the very near term. But importantly, we need to become good at measuring skills and knowledge and behaviors even outside of our learning programs. Because the business, what they really want to know is, do people have the skills? Can they work in this new way? And they don't care where people learn it. They don't care if they had learned it prior to the person coming into the organization. They don't care if they learn it from outside of the company. They just need to know who can do what. And so as a field, we need to start thinking about measurement of skills and knowledge and behaviors and all that stuff, just in general, and not necessarily before and after our interventions, because our interventions are not the point.
You work in an organization that, let's say, it's very easily sells skills, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you basically working in a big service business in IT, and so you're selling projects with people with certain skills that most of your customers don't have or don't have enough of, right? So luckily, you're in a business where, learning and having the right skills should be really integral to everything you do. I think that's important for the audience to know, because I believe this makes you, a little bit advanced. That makes you a front runner, right? Because you have good conditions. Let's say it that way. But that doesn't mean it's easy, right? Don't get me wrong. So maybe you can fill us a little bit in here in terms of, what company are you working for, and how do you implement what you were just referring to, right? That it's all about the impact of learning, and it's about the skills and assessing them in the right way. How did you get this going?
So I didn't get any of this. So, okay, let me step back. So the company that I work for is called EPAM Systems. It's a 60,000 person, $5 billion, as you say, professional services company. And almost everyone in the company is a software engineer, a data scientist, or an AI expert, right? So it's like a bunch of technical people. And at the very beginning of the company, so 30 something years ago when it was founded, the business, the founders of the company, wanted to match people to work at the client site, right, in the most data-driven way. They are software engineers, and that's how you just think about the world. And so they hit upon two data elements as being the foundation for how they were going to match people in work. And the first was actually tasks. So understanding from a client project perspective, what are all the tasks that need to happen? What is the client paying us to help deliver? And they thought if we can break that down, we can then figure out what are the skills required to do all of those tasks. And then we can go look into our workforce to figure out who has the skills. And so that's how they created this system of matching people to work. So it was initially just about staffing. But what they realized over time is that those skills data are actually incredibly useful because you can use those skills data to figure out who to hire, to figure out how to upskill people, to figure out how to move people around into different roles in the company. And they, most importantly, from my point of view, figured out that if you actually manage performance based on skills data, you can make a whole lot of really important things happen. So at EPAM today, the reason that our learning culture is the way it is, isn't because we have better training than anybody else, although I like to think that we do. But really, it's because we have created a system where employees it's transparent what skills they need to develop, and they're motivated to build those skills because their job depends on it. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit mean, but when you think about it from a business perspective, as a business, we need people to do the jobs that they're in. And because we are in technology, those goalposts have always been changing, right? So even though you're hired in to do a job and you need these skills on, year one, by year 3, things have changed and we need you in your job to have new skills. And so we've always had the mentality of the jobs are evolving. We need people to evolve. If they don't know what skills they need, they can't actually grow. And if we don't give them a good reason to build those skills, chances are they won't. And so the whole learning foundation at EPAM is actually based on this idea that we need to understand the skills of our people so that we can help align people to the business strategy at all times. And that happened when I was in middle school, so I can take no credit for any of this.
Yeah, but I really love this. Why? Because your company EPAM is the living proof, that becoming a skill-driven, skill-based organization and so on. It's not about the technology, and it's also not about AI. It's really about this mentality, as you coined it. It's about seeing the business need, behind skills, and maybe because of the business model you have, there is a certain advantage for that to see it, but. Well, I mean, this for me is really mind-blowing to hear right now because it gives so much answer, I think, to much of the buzz which is also happening here on Unleash, of course. I mean, is that also something you experience or you feel, being in the industry, talking also to other L&D heads?
Yes, I will say, I think I love to think about everything in terms of learning. But actually, even learning is in service of business agility. Basically, the idea that as your business strategy changes, as technology changes, as AI comes in, business leaders can't actually keep their companies alive unless they can get people in the company to constantly learn and grow and change. And so it's learning, it isn't about AI, but it is essential to realizing the value of AI. And so I think that's incredibly important. But as I'm walking around, this conference and many other conferences, what I am struggling to see are people leaders who are thinking about their function in terms of business agility, in terms of AI enablement, in terms of data-driven people practices. We so often think about all of the skills and learning stuff as a technology problem, but it is not. It is a data problem. It's a data problem. And And I get very nervous when I'm in sessions like this because I work with the business. That's what I do all day long. I work with executives both in my company and with our clients, talking about how are they going to get their people to know and do the right things to enable their AI strategy. And I don't hear a lot of people in conferences like that or this making that connection. They're not seeing the path toward realizing business value through learning and through HR and through mobility and through these other mechanisms. They tend to think of all of those things as like functional silos. And that's concerning because the business needs them to be thinking about it very differently.
How does the business needs them to think about it?
The business needs to think, okay, so the way that I talk and businesses talk to me is to realize AI or any other business strategy, essentially you need people to know and be able to do a bunch of things, okay, whatever that is. Let's call that the denominator.
Yeah.
What you actually have are people who don't always know how to do all of those things. So the current state of their skills and behaviors, let's call that the numerator. There is a delta between what you have, the numerator, and what you need, the denominator. The entire role of the talent organization is to close the gap, is to through hiring, through mobility, through whatever, like through learning, right? To make the numerator the same as the denominator as best you can. And within the learning function, right, the learning function, their goal is to close that gap within every single individual. So this is how the business needs us to be thinking about our jobs, as closing the delta between what the business has and what employees bring to the table today. But that, in the learning space, for example, has nothing to do with training. That has to do with, first of all, measuring what it is that every individual employee has that the business needs, making transparent to the employee whatever the gap is between what they have and what the business needs, and then facilitating an environment where people can learn. Now, sometimes that's going to be through formal training, but a lot of times it's not. It's going to be through L&D helping people find mentors or helping them figure out who to follow on LinkedIn or what conferences to attend or what questions they should be asking their friendly neighborhood large language model, right? There are so many ways that people learn outside of formal training contexts, but in the L&D world, we don't tend to think about or talk about those things, even though they are possibly more impactful than training. That's what the business needs us to do, is to be responsible for helping employees close the gap in skills and behaviors, not building training for them to access or not.
Yeah. How do you get into those conversations about those problems, about these challenges? Because I've seen many L&D leaders, maybe twofold, too busy, right? Just, pushing this old legacy software curriculums whatsoever, or also not really accepted, right, in those strategic discussions. So how do you get in those discussions, early enough to be more a general problem solver versus, ticking the box, yes, we did this formal training format?
So I'm very lucky in that in my company, my actual, EPAM, I don't have this problem. As I said, we have figured this out. So when I talk to executives, it's usually clients. And the clients come to me initially often and say, hey, can you build me a training program to solve this problem? And I say, I can, but it won't work unless these other things are present. No, so first off, the problem has to be a problem that training can solve, right? Which, most problems are not just a training problem, right? The second thing that has to be true is that employees have to want to learn. They have to be motivated to learn. I can build the most incredibly well-designed learning program for them, but if they don't show up, or if they show up and they don't care, then it doesn't matter. Like you, as business leader, have to build an environment where employees actually deeply want to learn and will therefore go through all of the challenge, the time, the effort to learn. That's number two. The third thing that has to be true, which is really hard, is that the environment around the employee can't shut down the behavior that we're trying to build through this learning program. So, a great example is agile. Of course, everyone wants to be agile. And clients ask us all the time, oh, can you please come in and do some agile training? And I'm like, of course, I'm happy to help you. But are your processes going to shut down what I've taught people how to do? Is the way that you budget, your finance processes, are your tools, are your incentive structures, are your job descriptions? There are so many things around employees that can make all this education stuff worthless, even if people really did learn. And so when I say this to executives, they are shocked. They get really quiet. They think, and then they say, thank you. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to always do what I tell them they need to do, but they appreciate the fact that I have not just said, yes, I'll build you a training program, gone off and built this thing, spent a lot of money, and the business has nothing to show for it. So executives, when I explain all of this stuff to them, even if they don't like my answer, they like the fact that I have been honest with them. And then they come back to me and say, okay, tell me how I'm really going to make this happen. How am I going to solve this problem? And then we have a real dialogue. And I think that more L&D organizations or leaders need to be willing to have that difficult conversation with the business because the business needs it.
Yeah.
And they won't trust us as learning leaders unless we are honest with them about what learning is and isn't and can and cannot do.
I think it's a perfect example because I think what happens in that conversation is you repatriate ownership where it belongs.
Yes.
Right? The L&D function, can try as hard as they want, but they will not make it, right?
Yes, exactly.
As you just said, because they are not so close to their employees. They don't have the power. They are not so close with their technology, with their customers to know, what even to teach and to train for and to create those conditions. They can't. Yeah, I love it. And coming back to IPA, how did you manage to recreate? How does it work? This I think you touched it already earlier, right? Mm-hmm. That your leaders are taking that ownership, having also those kind of conversations about development, about that's something many companies just wish for, right?
Yes.
This real conversation about development, this real conversation about performance, and having skills at the heart of that. That's I think a dream for many conversations. How did you get it to that point?
It was because, as you say, right? It was because I think a lot of it was the fact that people are our product, and so we're incentivized, right, as a business to have the right people with the right clients in the right projects. But I think the other big piece of it is that for 30 years, our business has been built around this idea that we need data on people. And once you have that data, it all becomes so much clearer how you're supposed to use it and function and make decisions around development. So the business at EPAM owns the skills of people. Like this is the cloud practice at EPAM, for example. Part of what their job is knowing what are the cloud skills that every person needs. They are also, with the data team, responsible for knowing who in the cloud practice has all of those skills. And when there are gaps, they reach out to L&D to say, we're not the learning experts. You guys are the training experts, to be clear. You guys come help us build the right programs to close these gaps. Let's talk about what is it that you need from us? What do you need from employees? How can we help you? And And so it completely changes the dynamic of L&D from being an order taker of the business says, go build us a cloud thing, to being an expert advising the business and helping them create the right learning environment with both training and informal learning to close those gaps, and then work with them to track, do employees now have this cloud skills that the business needs them to have?
Maybe you can bring in a bit more color in terms of really hands-on examples, maybe for both, right? Because what I hear is that the one thing is rather preventative, right? You help employees to maybe, take more ownership, become more intentional learners by creating a certain culture that is, enabled by the leaders. That's the one thing, and then the other thing is those really strategic initiatives, right? Which I think, for example, one was this engineering program I think you did with an amazing success where you I think also won awards.
Yes.
And so on. And I think this is now something that can ground our conversation in this really tangible kind of outputs.
Okay, so this is a good example. So it was at EPAM, we are very, very, very good at engineering. Mm-hmm. And we have this program that we think is foundational to our success called Engineering Excellence, or NGEX. So the NGEX program was actually envisioned by the business because they were trying to identify what skills do our engineers need to have that will make them special and different on the market. And so they were the ones to figure out what those skills were. L&D helped them actually turn all of those ideas into great education programs. And the business runs with that, and there's a great collaboration. But what's interesting about NGEX is that it is a requirement. It's funny, even if you come into EPAM and you've been an engineer somewhere else, it doesn't matter what level you come in at, you have to go through this education program because we think it's our secret sauce, it's our special way of doing things. And that means that the business has allocated time a lot of time from employees to spend in this learning program because they think that the business can't succeed unless everyone has the same understanding, speaks the same language, and has the same practices. So that's just one small example of how the business not just buys into learning, but sees learning as critical to the success of the business and therefore allocates time and resources to supporting it. Now, in addition to actually saying, here, people, go spend your time doing this, the business tracks every single person's performance in that course, not whether they've taken it or not, but actually ensuring that they have mastered every single skill in that course. And they won't staff them to projects with our clients until people have mastered all of those skills. I can't explain how incredible that is, because what it means is that every employee is deeply motivated to truly learn, because they can't actually keep their job if they don't do that. The business sees this as so fundamental to our success that they allocate millions of dollars every year in terms of time and direct resources to making it happen. And the impact of it is that we are different. Our engineers actually do function different than other engineers in competitive organizations because of our learning infrastructure and approach. So imagine that, but 100, 200 times, that's how EPAM works.
Wow. And I mean, you were talking about the impact here, right? So what are some KPIs that you maybe also use to prove that to the business?
That is so first of all, the business already believes it, right? So we don't have the burden of having to prove it, but we actually did do a really very fascinating study internally a few years ago where we did an A/B test. So we actually brought in some people, delayed them going through this NGEX program, and just to see essentially what delta was there between the people who did go through the program and the people that didn't. And we were then able to quantify how much faster they were, how many fewer errors they made, how much clients appreciated their work. And there's a lot of metrics. And we were able to show that the quality of engineering went up in the groups, or in the group that actually went through this program, and didn't go up as rapidly in the group that didn't. And then of course we had to take all the ones that hadn't gone through that and put them through, and then like never do that again. But that was the kind of analysis that we made in terms of KPIs around that specific program. Other than that, there is no kind of global KPI except for learning, except for what I would think of as the person role fit, right? So if you think about, again, this fraction of like all the skills required for your job as the denominator, and whatever the individual person has as the numerator, the goal is to make that difference as small as possible. And so when we track, we track that role fit connection. And if it's big, then we know we have a learning problem within individuals, right? Or a mobility problem. But other than that, there's no real way to track the KPIs of learning overall, because it's learning what and for whom and in what time frame that matters.
Yeah, I love that. So in other words, you are successful when no one is complaining, when no partner is kind of complaining, I don't have the right people.
Correct. And if they don't have the right people, that's actually their problem.
Yeah.
So we can help them, but it's their problem. And that, I think, is such a powerful thing, because it means that the business is incentivized to solve that problem. And they see us as an asset, not a throwing it over the wall. Here, L&D, you go solve that problem. It's not our problem, it's theirs.
I know you have also a big passion for learning design, right?
Yes.
That's also, I think, where you pull kind of, with your pedagogic kind of study background, comes from. How do you see learning design also evolving? I mean, you were talking about the program, and I heard in between the lines, it's very challenge-based, it's very kind of problem-solving type of learning by doing, right? It's not that they're clicking through slides and answering 3 multiple choice questions afterwards. That didn't sound like that.
No.
But maybe you can, fill us a little bit in here, and also, how with AI this might be even encouraged.
Okay. So the way that when we design learning programs, first of all, the number one predictor of learning, of like change in behavior and whatever, is prior knowledge. Okay, so pretty straightforward. If you already know something, you're going to learn it better. But the one that we can impact is feedback. So the most important thing that goes into any learning program at EPAM is feedback, which means that you have to have practice. So practice and feedback are the foundational elements of all of our learning programs. And so when we build a program, content is there, obviously. But the most that we focus on is practical tasks. If you were going to see this learning in your job, what would it look like? Let's find examples of that. Let's actually put you into a situation where you have to really practice it on a project, and have someone there with you, a coach who knows more than you do, giving you feedback. So that is the major emphasis for our program. So there's 4 elements. There's practice, there's feedback, there's content, and there's assessment. Because we need to know what you knew beforehand and what you know afterwards, so that we can assess, did you learn something? Did our program effectively help to close the delta? And then we can improve it and refine it over time. So those are the 4 elements of all of our programs. AI helps every single one of those things. So when you think about practice and feedback, we are building amazing AI environments for people to practice complex things in realistic environments that are not actually having to use client data, which is really helpful. We are also building agents in those environments to give them immediate feedback. So now you are practicing and getting feedback without having to use people, at a scale that we couldn't replicate with humans. When it comes to content, we are using AI to help make sure our content is cheaper to produce, it's more interactive, it's more personalized. We're teaching people and we're building small language models that are very specific to our enterprise so that people can query and learn through asking questions as opposed to having to go through any sort of like formal content. And then we are using AI to assess automatically how well someone is performing a task in an environment. So and that's only a few examples of the many, many ways that we're using AI. But AI is an incredibly valuable tool to support learning. And most of the value comes outside of using AI for content.
Wow. Good Morning L&D is the wake-up call for learning leaders and talent leaders. What is the one wake-up call that you feel every talent leader should be hearing right now?
We need to, as a field, focus on two things that we don't focus on today that are actually fundamental to us being able to keep our jobs as AI comes through. The first one is we need to get really good at measuring the skills and knowledge and behaviors of people. That is what the business needs to understand. If we're not going to do it, I'm not sure who is. They're asking us, tell us about the skills of our people. So that's number one. The second is that right now, no organization is set up to motivate people to learn. Right? No organization is designed this way. And we have to, as experts in learning, explain to the business, here is how we collectively, meaning primarily you, business, needs to do things differently in order to get people to know what they need to learn and then be motivated to learn it. Without those two things, L&D can't help the business solve problems. Because if we don't know exactly what skills we need to help solve for, we can't close the gap. And we can't make people want to learn. They have to want to learn. And the job of the business with our support is to change incentive structures and processes and incentives and tools in order to actually make learning a fundamental expectation for every role and something that people will benefit from if they do it.